Hello all. If we could just not project yet, just for a little while, just so that I can introduce the subject matter to you guys. Man, we're a bit thin in here, but it looks like more people are coming in, so you'll find that I'm going to move around a bit, so if you get a bit dizzy watching me dance up and down the stage, tell me to stop moving. And if I'm not talking loud enough or talking too loud, just give me a bit of a sign and we'll soon fix it up. So yeah, I've been involved with RIMPA, or should I say RMAA, since 1978, which is, I think that makes me probably one of the elder statesmen as far as the records industry is concerned in Australia. I've been a federal director in those days, we used to call it, for the RMAA 3 times, and I've been a RIMPA board member once prior to this, and so yeah, I've been involved in the industry for a long time. And you know, sometimes we often get muddled up between the technology of what we do and the basic understanding and fundamentals of what records, and I'll use the term reservedly, management is, because I think that's where the big change is that and we'll talk about that very briefly. So I've got half an hour to talk about the management system for records scheme, and we'll get into that as we go. The reason why I say the word management isn't as important as what we used to do, because as records managers, if I go back to when I started, so my first job was actually working at ASIO for 9.5 years, so we actually saw records management at a very granular level. So in those days, there was 450 odd people working in the organisation, and 105 of those actually worked in the records office. So we could see, you know, 1 in 4 people were managing information. We could see it very granular. We had processes that people didn't recognise, things like former papers, things like file registration unit. We had 4 people registering in the file registration unit. I had, as a senior records manager, I had 12 classifiers working for me. Now, to see information management at that granular level, it's really important to understand those concepts have not changed. What's changed is the technology and how we do things, and what has changed is that as a records manager, I cannot manage every single piece of information. It's physically impossible. I can't do it. But what we're now seeing in most organisations is a move towards, okay, what are our obligations as an organisation? What controls do we need to put in place to ensure that we answer those obligations? And then how do we actually assure the organisation for its compliance to those obligations? That's our role. And I think the reason why I wanted to paint that picture with you is to start talking about management system for records. Now, all of you, I'm sure if I ask, okay, I will ask the question. How many of you have read ISO 15489 or have a copy of it? Okay, nearly everyone in the audience. That's great, fantastic. How many of you have got a copy of ISO 30300 as a series? 1, 2, 3. Can I say to you, shame. I said this to you in 2019 when I first introduced this topic, and I'm going to say it to you again. 30300 is the management system for records. It is our Bible. Sure, 15489 talks about what is it and tells you a little bit about the how, but more about, you know, what is records management. 30300 talks about why is it important, and it tells management these are the things that you will be measured against. Okay, really important stuff, and yet as people in our industry, we don't know that. Now, the big thing that I've been, I won't say fighting with RIMPA, encouraging RIMPA to do is to think about how do we get third-party auditors accredited to actually certify an organisation for the management system for records. It's not that hard. You know, when you think about it, we've got all of these other auditing organisations that come round and audit us for quality, they come round and audit us for assets, they come round and audit us for safety, environment. You can think of those management systems. The management systems are all joined together. They are a framework of management systems. Risk is in there as well. So if you think about the management system for records, it's pretty obvious that how many people have had a financial audit done in their organisations? If you haven't had a financial audit, you're going to be pretty unique as far as being able to get away with not having one done. When a financial audit is done, what is the chance that the auditor is not necessarily an accountant? Probably pretty high. You'll find that most financial audits are actually done by criteria. So the people that come in are normally analysts. They normally have very, very good ways of asking questions and interrogating the organisation about those aspects. Same thing with quality. You will find that, you know, a quality audit will be done not necessarily by a quality manager. It may be done by someone who understands that. The same thing can happen with the management system for records. So now if I could project that screen, please, that's up. And maybe I have, oh, that's my fault, sorry. I have now. Okay, now for those people that are part of the standards organisation, humblest apologies, I don't care. Normally standards will turn around to us and say, you can't project this stuff and you can't use this stuff because it's intellectual property. The trouble is, it's the intellectual property of the people on the committee. So the people on the committee have come up with this stuff. This is taken straight out of, it's just a cut, and you can see the watermark there says that it actually belongs to my personal email address, so please don't tell them where you got it from. Shh, yes, absolutely. But when you look at that chart, that comes out of ISO 30301. And I think it's probably one of the best charts that actually explains what we have, broadly speaking, not all the detail, but at least broadly speaking, about what we have as far as standards in our industry, right in the middle of our industry. So on the left-hand side there, so up the very top you've got vocab, okay? It's a good, clean way of actually saying this is the vocab of our industry. You may not agree with the terms in it, okay, that's fine, but at least there is a vocab for our industry. On the left-hand side, we're talking about the management system stuff that the business needs to know about why do they do this. And there's two standards that are of particular interest, 30301, which we'll come back to, which is the actual requirements. These are the statements that say, this is how you will be managed, this is how you'll be measured, sorry. So it talks about statements that includes the word must, okay? 30302 is the guidelines for implementation. I'm not particularly too worried about that, but we can talk about that later on. On the other side of the fence, on the operational side of the fence, you can see that there are at least 4 areas of records management operational activity that if you didn't realise that we have standards for, go and find them. How many of you understood that we actually had standards for the metadata for records? Yeah? Okay, that's great, that's fantastic. I'm really pleased that you've done that. Can I also say somewhere down in the middle down there is the mother of the metadata record standards, Barbara Reid. So I humbly acknowledge Barbara for this stuff. The father of it, I used to say, was Hans Hofman out of the Netherlands, but Barbara was definitely the mother of it. The analysis methodology, so we've got 26122, work process, we've got risk assessment for records, appraisal for managing records, processes and functional requirements for designing and implementing record systems. Most of you would be aware of 16175 as a standards group. And then down the bottom, specific processes and enablers. I'm not going to go into those, but that's some of the standards that we've been working on since 1988. Okay, so people don't understand, I don't think most people understand, just how deep Australia is in the development of standards around records management. And there's a lot more behind that, you know. This is just looking at the very top tier of stuff. Now, the reason why I wanted to talk to you about the management system for records in particular, now this comes out of 30301 again, and it talks about establishing and implementing, maintaining and improving a management system for records to support its business, ensuring conformity with its stated records policy, or most importantly C, which is demonstrate conformity with 30301. And you do that by either undertaking a self-assessment, that's pretty hard. You can do that by doing self-confirmation of its self-declaration by a party external to the organisation, something I want to talk to you about. And the third one is seeking certification of its MSR by an external party. Now, as I said, one of the points that I wanted to get to is that I've been working with RIMPA for the last 2 or 3 years to actually see if there was a way that we could actually set up a scheme, that's what we're calling it, a management system for records scheme, to actually be able to accredit independent third-party auditors. And in certain cases, to actually accredit internal auditors, if that be the case. So what we've designed at the moment and what we're talking with Anne Cornish, the CEO, is what is the criteria that we expect an auditor to examine, you know? So we're using 15489. So 15489, and again, one of the subject matter that you didn't see on that previous diagram, there is a compliance handbook for records. It talks broadly about the subject matter, and there's 7 components in there, and the components have various aspects that you should ask questions about. What we're building beside that is a maturity assessment questionnaire. And instead of 7 components, we're thinking about 10 components because we can actually break it out a little bit further when we start comparing both 15489, which is the actual records management stuff, and 30301, which is the management system for records stuff, and you combine them together, you can actually end up with 10 components. Now, out of those 10 components, we're seeing that there's probably about 45 questions, roughly 45 questions that we want auditors to use to examine and question the maturity within an organisation. And based on that, because we're setting it up against those 2 standards, we believe that the magic word is consistency. So, are there any New Zealanders in the audience? I'll be real careful on how I say this because I don't want to hurt anything. So, New Zealand recently had an audit done by an external third-party auditor for most of the government departments across New Zealand as far as records management is concerned. I guess the feedback that we got from that in the industry, from my perspective, was that what was missing out of that was consistency. So, you know, it was really hard to examine one organisation to another organisation. They talk globally about what happened in New Zealand, I get that. What we want to do with what we're approaching with the management system for records scheme is that we want any third-party auditor, not just one in particular, any third-party auditor to be able to audit an organisation and consistently apply the same scale, the same questions, the same understanding and analysis to come out of that, so that if someone says, well, you know, your organisation is really fantastic at doing records management, but it could do with some improvement in metadata as an example, we know that that would be a consistent analysis across multiple organisations. Now, one of the things that I haven't said to RIMPA that I would really love to see is that we start benchmarking the industry based on these sort of assessments. And we could do that once we get consistency in any particular industry. Take your pick. So I guess I'm looking at this and saying, we've got some steps that we need to take. We're at the point now, and I don't know if this has been released prior to today. We started talking with an organisation called JASANS. Now, JASANS is the Joint Accreditation Standards for Australia and New Zealand. JASANS is a global organisation, and they have the authority to accredit certain organisations to perform audits. Okay, so if you think about doing a quality audit, JASANS can accredit an auditing company to do a quality audit. When we started speaking to JASANS, they basically came back to us and said, look, they're really interested in the subject matter, but they're uncertain about the take-up within the industry. I get that, you know. I mean, we know, we in this room and at this conference, we know the importance of the work that we do. We understand the benefits of getting it right. We find it really hard to explain to our organisations why they should do it, even though we can see that stuff quite clearly. I'll give you an example that hit me directly in the face. I used to work for BHP. I think Michael mentioned it at the very start. So I've worked 4 times for BHP, twice as an employee, twice as a contractor. At one point there, I was trying really, really hard to win the board over to put in, doesn't matter what the brand is, to put in a particular document management system. It was going to cost us, I mean, for the whole of BHP, it was going to cost us like $5 million. It was a bucket load of money. And we kept on going to the board, and I'm saying to the board, look, I can give you a positive rate of return. I can, you know, tell you that this has got some really, really great legs on it, and it's fantastic, and it's going to, you know, save you money and everything. And they turned to me and said, yeah, fantastic idea, David, you know, not a problem at all, but not this month. This month we've got to go and dig more holes. Okay. A couple of months later you go back, oh, fantastic idea, David, we're really committed to doing this, but not this month. This month we've got to fill in holes. You know, you go to them again a couple of months later, oh, not really this month, David, because we've got environmental impacts happening. So in the end, I got to the point where I'd been to them 3 or 4 times, and each time they've said yes, but. And so I turned to the company secretary, a lady called Karen Wood at the time, who later became our project sponsor. Now, I've actually got a video of her actually launching this stuff. She became our project sponsor, and I said to Karen, look, you can see, as the company secretary, you can see this stuff happening in the board. How do I get this thing over the line? She said, you got to tie it to our safety values. And the number one safety value for BHP in those days was safety and environment. They actually had the two linked together as being the number one, safety and environment. So we went away and we did some analysis, and we tried to link it back to those business values. What we found is, and this is going back to 2002, I think, 2003. What we found is that when I looked at incidents, safety incidents in BHP, 94% of our information management problems were actually linked to safety incidents. People were actually working from the wrong version of a document. People couldn't find the document. People didn't know who to ask. I'm looking at someone who's nodding and saying yes, 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 yes. And that story perpetuated, just kept on going. So we had 94% of our incidents linked to information management. I went back to the board and said, look at this. And they said, if you can give us one incident that ended up in a death, and there was a pile of deaths in our company in those days. I mean, it's a mining company, it happens. And in South Africa, in our coal mines, we had quite a few unfortunate deaths. I went back and reported that to them. They said, how much money do you want? We ended up spending $65 million on that project. you know. And what failed us in the end, so the policy is still current there. What failed us in the end was the technology, because it's like all other projects, you know, you've got that 10-year cycle of technology, and unless you keep on constantly refreshing it, it falls off the end. That's what happened at BHP. Having said that, the policy still stuck. So that was one thing. Policy and the change did stick, but the technology fell down. So that whole story comes back to talking, I guess, a little bit about why it's so important that we actually understand what our organisations are capable of, what is the capacity within the organisations, where are we right now from an as-is point of view, where are we from a to-be point of view. Having a management system for record scheme gives us that capability of actually doing that measurement, you know, and you don't want to do that as a one-off. You want to do it like every 2 years. So you set up the as-is, you figure out what's our target operating model going to look like in 4 or 5 years' time, you know, where do we want to be? And you start tracking that using the same management system for record scheme. You track it, and then you set yourselves up internally as your own benchmark. Okay, that's where we were. We've now progressed 2 years later. Have we improved? Oh God, maybe not. You can then have some decent management reporting around what we traditionally have as a records management system. So I've still got about 8 minutes to go, roughly. So I'm going to open it. Do you guys have any questions about what I've spoken about so far before I wrap up? Have I sold it to you? Is it a good idea? So let me ask a question of you guys. If we were to, say, get this scheme into a pilot type environment, who would be willing to run a pilot in their organisation? One here? Anyone else? One over there? Okay, that's a great indication. Benita, we need to take note of that. I've got at least 5 or 6 people that are willing to go. I think that's a question, is it? Sorry, just hold it for 1 second. We'll run a microphone down to you.
Hello everyone online.
Nope.
My name is Wicca. I'm from IP Australia.
Yep.
What I was going to say is I would be willing to be part of a pilot for this, but I would only do that if the archives were supportive of the outcomes of this. So if we were to get a compliance stamp, is that something that the archives would be supportive of?
Yeah, so if I've got the question right, and just correct me if I haven't, so you would like to run that compliance check in the archives area only?
Sorry? Oh, I'm talking about the National Archives being supportive of that kind of a compliance stamp, if you get what I mean. So, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So the compliance standard that we're thinking of, it won't actually put a stamp on it, okay? It won't be, you won't get the 5 ticks of assurance like you do with quality or what was quality. Yeah. What we end up with is you getting a report, or what we're proposing is you will end up with a report that says, these are the areas that you're good at, here's some areas that you've identified where you need corrective action. Here is I guess, a stake in the ground of where you are right now. Here's where we say you need improvement over the next period of time. And we would try and, I believe, this part we haven't actually mapped out in the scheme, is we would actually look at it from a risk perspective as well. Okay. Does that answer your question? Cool. Any further questions? Sorry, I have to come down there. I wear hearing aids, so I'm sort of running around saying, what? Anyone?
Enthusiastically, what were you talking about?
Right.
So who was nodding over here, nodding away enthusiastically? I think it was you. Yeah. What was that part of the presentation, and why were you so enthusiastic about agreeing with what was being said?
My experience, I work in the mining industry, and I started off in the operational side and then worked through into the corporate side, from technical writing and through information management. And now I'm lead the information governance for the business that I'm in. That link to safety, that link to risk, is the only way that we can get this stuff across the line. And it really is when you can. I did a very similar thing. I linked back the documentation to the incidents that we had across the business until they could see that there was a risk in and around not having our documentation up to date and of the standard it needed to be. Yep. There was no action happening. And then you could see the spark in the eyes as soon as it was like, okay, if something's going to happen, and this is, mining industry is very, very risk-based. Yeah. So to me, we really do need to present that as strongly as possible. Yeah. And from a mining industry perspective, that would help, but I would assume that across other like private industry, that would be definitely a driver behind it, because it doesn't make any money, but it does save money and it can save lives. Yeah,
agree 100% with what you're saying. I mean, the other side of is not only risk, but when you start thinking about opportunity, lost opportunity. So I mean, again, I'll refer to BHP. They had the Octeti case. You guys had a different case more recently, but Octeti was all around how much money did we actually use in a bad court case, bad piece of litigation against BHP from the Papua New Guinean government. Now you can argue that BHP did the right thing or the wrong thing as far as that piece of litigation was concerned, but really that's beside the point. BHP had to discover the documents that ended up being loaded on 2,000 CDs. We ended up copying them 6 times for the various legal departments or legal parties that were involved. And in the end, we paid out $500 million. And my question's always, and to do that, we actually ended up getting 27 lawyers plus their associates at 600 Burke Street in Melbourne on 2 floors for 2 years to mount the case. So to mount the case was $35 million. To lose the case was $500 million. My question's always been, if they knew what was on those 2,000 CDs, would they have tried to settle out of court? Would they have tried to have settled for $200 million? Whatever the figure is, they would have known what the lost opportunity cost was. So it's still risk, but it's another lost opportunity. So, yeah.
Okay, we have time for one more. Let's go. If you're sitting there, don't be shy. One more question. If not, that's fine. What's the final and key takeaway that you want everyone to remember from your presentation this afternoon, David?
I really want you guys to know that Australia used to lead the world in standards creation. We're not necessarily leading it anymore. There are a number of countries that are starting to move ahead of us in this field. Now, I know a number of you are interested in standards and would be interested in partaking and being part of the committee. By all means, we're always looking for people to come in. We're always looking for, pardon my pun, but new blood, because some of us have been involved in this for a long time. So my personal involvement in standards creation has been from 1988. So it's been a while, and Barbara's down there sort of, yep, she's had enough. So we're sort of saying, if there's new people to come on board, would love to have you. And in the words of one of the previous presenters today, this is a way to actually think of new, innovative ways that records can take on more meaning in our industry. So would love to have you involved. Please come along.